Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar entitled What is Graduate School? My name is Calvin Ho. I am the Mellon Mays Graduate Research Mentor here at the UCLA Undergraduate Research Center for the Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Mellon Mays Professional Network and the center that I work for, the URC for the Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. And the special thing about today's webinar is that we have a live studio audience because we are in Los Angeles. So there are people here in the room with me today. So the format is as follows. Everyone is muted, but you can ask a question using the Q&A button at any time. During the Q&A session at the end of the webinar, I will answer live audience questions first, and then I will get to the questions asked by the online audience. The video of this webinar will be available later for reference, so if you have to skip out in the middle of it, or you have a friend who would be interested but couldn't make it today, you can send them the link to that and we'll make that available online for you. Okay, so who am I and why am I qualified to give this webinar? I am a PhD student in sociology at UCLA. And I was a Mellon Mays undergraduate fellow at Swarthmore College way back in the Stone Age. Since 2012, I've been working as a graduate research mentor for the Mellon Mays program here at UCLA. And so I give a bunch of workshops just like this one about what is graduate school, how do you apply to graduate school, and how do you negotiate funding offers for graduate school, things like that. The learning objectives for today's workshop are as follows. So first, I'd like you all to understand the key differences between different types of graduate programs. And second, I want you to be familiar with the funding options for graduate study. And this is important because some programs are going to cost you a lot of money up front, and some programs are actually going to pay you to study. I want you to know how to select programs to apply to, and also to identify which elements you need to prepare for that application. The workshop today is necessarily very broad. I could spend a whole hour talking about all of these different elements, but we only have limited time today. And so if you have specific questions, please leave those for the Q&A section. So the first issue that we need to tackle is, what do we mean when we say graduate school? Graduate school could mean any sort of degree that you get after finishing your bachelor's degree. So, for instance, you could get a master's degree in English or in anthropology. You could get a master's degree in computer science also. So that would be like the difference between a Master of Arts, an MA, and a Master of Science, MS. You could also get a doctorate. Most of these degrees are called Ph.D, Doctor of Philosophy, but there are also some specialized doctorate degrees with different initials, such as the Doctor of Education, EDD. Graduate school could also mean any number of professional degrees that you get after your bachelor's degree. So you could get a JD, which would allow you to practice law. You can get an MD to be a medical doctor. There's also any number of professional master's degrees, like the Masters of Business Administration, MBA, the Master of Fine Arts, MFA, the Master of Public Policy, MPP, and the Master of Public Health, MPH, just to name a few. But today we are going to focus on the academic masters, specifically in the humanities, arts, and social sciences, so the MA degree, and the Doctor of Philosophy, the PhD. Now, there are a number of differences between the master's and the PhD. And I get this question a lot. Students will come to me and ask me, they'll say that they want to go to graduate school, but they don't really know how long they should be in school, what kind of degree they want to get, whether a master's degree or a doctorate is right for them. Now, here are the main differences between a Master of Arts and a PhD. Master of Arts generally takes 1 to 2 years. In the US, 2 years is more common. And they are generally unfunded, which means that you typically have to pay tuition and cost of living just like undergrad. Master's degrees typically contain mostly coursework, so you will be spending your time in classes to get your degree. Now, a PhD is a completely different animal in a lot of ways. Most US PhDs in the fields that we're covering today take 5 years or more, and sometimes this includes the time to get a master's degree, sometimes it does not. The great thing about PhDs is that typically they are funded either by fellowships or by work opportunities. So essentially, the university will pay you to study. It's not a whole lot of money, but they will pay you instead of the other way around. The main activity that you would be doing in a PhD program is research. So you might take a few years of coursework, but most of the time you will be doing research on the topic that you're interested in. And a PhD is generally required if you want a career as a college professor. Now, in the past, it used to be the case that you could get a teaching position in, say, a community college with a master's degree, but as the job market is shifting, there are more and more people with PhDs competing for the same job. So if that is your career goal, then you should consider getting a PhD. With a master's degree, there are a number of career paths you can take afterwards. With a PhD, that is typically considered specialized training for a degree, for a career as a college professor. Although, as I said, as the job market is shifting, that is changing a bit, especially in some fields in the humanities. And we can talk more about that as we get into the Q&A session. But as you can see, the main difference is time, the activity that you'll be spending most of your time doing, and whether or not you have to pay for the degree. Just a quick overview of how a PhD program is structured. You might have heard that some people will apply to a PhD program and get a master's degree while they're in the PhD program. That is actually quite common. So most PhD programs are structured like this diagram. First, you do some coursework, and then after the coursework, you get a master's degree. And then you'll do exams in your field. Typically, these are called field exams or comprehensive exams because they're supposed to test you on the level of knowledge you have over the field. They want to make sure that you're an expert in this area. And then you also typically will have to defend a dissertation prospectus or dissertation proposal. This is your research plan for the big project that you're going to do to get that Doctor of Philosophy degree. And then after you defend your prospectus, you go do whatever it is that you need to do to write that dissertation, write that big project. And then once that project is approved, you get a PhD. There's a bunch of variations of this, but this is generally how it works in most US PhD programs. Now, how do you pay for graduate school? This is a really big question, especially for students who are considering master's degrees and just master's degrees. So if you apply for a master's degree and that is it, once you're finished with the master's degree, you get your diploma and you leave, that's called a terminal master's. And those master's programs are typically unfunded, which means that you will have to pay either with loans or with out-of-pocket funds. Sometimes these programs will have special opportunities for students to be teaching assistants or graduate student researchers. And sometimes you might be able to get a fellowship to cover some or all of the cost. But this is the exception, not the norm for master's degrees in the humanities and social sciences. For PhDs, this calculus is a little different. in that generally I would advise students not to attend a PhD program unless they were getting some sort of funding. You should not have to pay tuition, and ideally the program would be paying you either through a fellowship or through a work opportunity as a teaching assistant or a graduate student researcher. A lot of PhD students, even if they have what is considered full funding, will still have to take out loans and will still have to pay out of pocket for certain work-related expenses. But typically, most of the cost of education is being paid for. Now, the next question is, where should you apply for a graduate degree? What kind of university do you want to go to? Or what kind of program do you want to go to? Now, the factors that you have to consider when you are thinking about going to graduate school are very different from the factors that you considered when choosing where to go to undergrad. The student life factors are less important, and the academic fit factors are much more important. So that's why academic fit is at the very bottom of this pyramid. For a master's program, academic fit would be, are you going to be able to take the classes that you want that are going to help you reach your goal? Whether your goal is to be professionally prepared for a certain career path, or whether your goal is to gain subject knowledge in a specific area. For a PhD program, it gets even more specific than that, in that you are looking for the right people. So people who are working in your field who are very closely aligned with what you do. For example, my own PhD in sociology, I'm studying the sociology of immigration. If I went to another university that did not have any faculty members who were studying immigration, then it would be very difficult for me to make any progress on my project, because even if they have the best of intentions, the faculty there would not be able to advise me on the specifics of my project. Another important factor is location. Now, I hate to say this as an important factor, and there are certainly lots of people who will disagree with me on this, but the truth of the matter is that most people do PhDs and master's degrees when they are somewhere between their early 20s and mid 30s. And this is prime time in your life cycle. So you want to be sure that you're going to be happy living wherever it is that you're living. And for different people, that means different things. Do you need to be close to your family? Do you need to be far away from your family? For people of color and for queer people, another major issue is, well, who am I going to date? Who am I going to marry? If I'm already in a relationship, are they going to want to move with me to this location? And so location is actually quite important. And then at the tip of that pyramid, when considering where you should apply, I would put prestige. Now, I also really hate to say that prestige matters, but it does, in that, especially for PhD programs, it matters where you got your degree and who you studied with, because that has bearing on what kinds of jobs you get. And if you go to academic conferences, professional conferences, people are going to be looking at your name tag to see what institution you are affiliated with. And based on that, they will think, okay, I need to talk to this person, or actually, she's not worth my time. That's just life, unfortunately, and we can discuss why that is and how we can deal with that. So prestige does matter to some degree, but it is not the end-all be-all. Now, after you get into a graduate program, whether that be a master's program or a PhD program, the calculus is a little different, because then you have funding, which is almost as important as academic fit. And this is this is true for both master's programs and for PhD programs. For master's programs, you're going to have to consider whether or not it is worth it to pay however much they're asking per year to get this degree from this program at this university. So the academic fit might be great, the location might be great, it's really prestigious, but are you willing to either fork out the cash or put up with that amount of student debt on top of any undergraduate debt you might have to get that degree? For a PhD program, this is typically where they will offer you funding. And believe it or not, this is negotiable. So if you let's say you get an offer from Harvard and they are hypothetically willing to pay you $30,000 a year to study for your PhD at Harvard, and you get another offer from, say, UC Berkeley, and they're willing to put up $20,000. You could go, and if you really want to go to Berkeley, you could tell Berkeley, hey, I got this offer from Harvard. And funding is really important to me because, you know, $20,000 a year, $30,000 a year, that's still going to be really tough to live on in the Bay Area or in Boston. So could you, match their offer, or could you perhaps consider adding to my package by giving me summer funding or something like that? This is something that you should really talk to your mentors about. This negotiation process is extremely tricky. At UCLA, we do offer workshops on that. So for those of you who are at UCLA or in the room, we can talk about that later. Now, the application element. So what do you need to prepare to apply to graduate school, either a master's program or a PhD program? There are 4 general elements: the statement of purpose, the writing sample, the GRE, and letters of recommendation. Now, the most important is the statement of purpose. For both master's programs and for PhD programs, they want to know why it is that you want to study at that institution. And if you're having trouble coming up with reasons as to why you should study at that institution, maybe you should consider whether or not you should be applying to this place in the first place. For a PhD program, the statement of purpose has to be quite specific. It should lay out your general research interests, and it should also indicate why you are applying to this specific program to work with these specific faculty members. This is stuff that you have to do a lot of research on, and for that reason, each application essay, each statement of purpose is going to be very different from each other. In addition to a general statement of purpose, which typically says, I want to come here because I want to study this, you might also have the option of writing what is called a diversity statement. So that's much more similar to the essays that you wrote to get into your undergraduate institution. This essay is about who you are as a person and what kinds of diversity you might be able to add to the program or to the university. And a lot of universities will use this particular essay to figure out whether you're eligible for certain pots of fellowship money or certain opportunities that they can offer you right off the bat. So it's important that if this is optional, you should write it anyway, because this could make you eligible for special consideration for funding. The next element is the writing sample. For PhD programs, this is generally anywhere from 15 to 20 pages, and it should be a good writing sample, and that you should be proud of what you wrote, you should be proud of the argument that you made in that paper, and you should have proofread it very thoroughly to make sure that you don't have any embarrassing typos or grammatical errors. For a lot of students here at UCLA, this writing sample length is a major issue because most of the papers that are assigned in classes are quite short. So if that is the case, you should think about working on that early. And you could also ask to see if they will take several writing samples and combine that into one writing sample. So say their recommended page length is 20 pages, and you have a 10-page paper and 2 5-page papers that you're really proud of, see if they will accept that instead. And that really varies from program to program, so you'll have to ask about that. The next important element is the GRE, the Graduate Record Exam. This is unfortunately a terrible exam, and it is generally required for any sort of master's or PhD program that you would be applying to. This is not the same. MBAs and law school, they require different kinds of exams. The GRE is typically used for academic master's programs in the liberal arts and for doctoral programs. If you can afford it, I would highly recommend a prep course, or at least getting some books and materials to study on your own. Unfortunately, the GRE is important, as it does not necessarily determine who gets in or who gets out, but it does determine who gets looked at. So, for instance, a program might not have a specific cutoff. So they might not say that you need 10,000 points to come into our program or else, but they might have an informal rule about that. So say they get a whole stack of applications and they don't know who to start looking at first, they're going to start looking at the people with the higher GRE scores. So the reasoning behind getting a good GRE score is really just so that people don't have an excuse to discriminate against you. You can check to see what the median GRE score is for a particular program or department by either looking at their website or looking at the university's website. The university might have more specific information. Or for instance, here at UCLA, all of our graduate admissions is handled through a central graduate division, and they keep the records on that. The individual departments don't necessarily do this themselves. So they can tell you what the median GRE score is for the programs that you're applying to. And then the last important element is letters of recommendation. These letters should be from, if you're applying for a master's or a PhD program in these kinds of fields, they should be from academics, so from professors who know you well. If it's been a while since you've been out of school, make sure to keep in touch with these people, reach out to them again before the application season starts, so that they remember who you are and what you've been up to. So generally you are required to submit 3 letters of recommendation from academics who can speak about your aptitude and your readiness for graduate study. A lot of students will ask whether these people have to be in the same field as the program that you're applying to, and the answer is probably no. So say you are switching fields, say your undergraduate degree was in anthropology, and now you are moving into a graduate program in performance studies. But you've taken one performance studies class as an undergrad. The professor doesn't know you at all. Should you get a letter from that professor to demonstrate that you know your stuff in performance studies? I would say no, that you should get letters from the people who know you best, regardless of what department you're in, because a letter that just says Johnny was a good student is actually a pretty bad letter. You want someone who's able to speak about you in much more depth, using specific examples, and being able to really contextualize your experiences, both academically and both academic experiences and personal experiences, for the committee that's reading the application. All right, that is the end of the prepared presentation. We are now at the Q&A time, so if you are watching online, you can press the blue Q&A speech bubble, and you'll get a little window on the side of your screen to ask your questions. I don't see any questions online right now. Do we have any questions from here in our live studio audience?
Mellon Mays is a fellowship, but is there any place we can go to for a website to look up other fellowships that could possibly fund doctorates or masters?
Okay, great. So the question was, where do you find information about fellowships and other funding opportunities that are available for graduate study? This is a really good question. A lot of universities will have a central graduate division that will list all of these different opportunities that you could be eligible for. So here at UCLA, we have several listservs that just send out information about fellowships and grant opportunities that are coming up. And there are specific offices that give workshops on the major fellowship opportunities, like the National Science Foundation's Graduate Research Fellowship Program, the Ford Foundation Fellowship, and the Paul and Daisy Soros Foundation Fellowship. Another way to find out about these fellowship opportunities is to ask around. So if you are still an undergraduate and considering graduate school, ask your TAs, what fellowships are there for people who are studying things in your field?
I kind of have a question, but I don't know how to articulate it. When you say that for the master's, that's what I'm more interested in. If I'm an undocumented student, like how would the funding go? Because you said that mostly masters, like you don't get a lot of funding for that. So is there anything at all?
Okay, so the question was about funding for master's programs and specifically for students who are undocumented. Now, unfortunately, the in-state tuition provisions are state by state. So each state sets their own rules for what kinds of state financial aid an undocumented student can be eligible for. So that, unfortunately, is up to the institution and to the state. Some private schools might have special funds available for undocumented students. It doesn't hurt to ask. Do we have any questions from the online audience? Is it appropriate to email every professor you are interested in working with at each school? That is a fantastic question. It doesn't hurt to email every professor you are interested in working with if you are applying to a PhD program, but do not expect that they will respond because one, they're extremely busy people, and two, I bet they're getting tons of these emails. One way to work around this is to send a very brief email and ask about maybe 15 or 20-minute phone call. That is something very concrete. They don't have to spend a lot of time there hashing out an email. And from that phone call, you get a better sense of their personality. Are they good to work with? Things like that. One tactic that I tried when I was applying to PhD programs was I asked a specific question about someone's work, and that backfired on me miserably because this person responded with a very brief email that just said, read my book. So don't do that. Our next question, how specific do your research ideas have to be? If you're applying to a master's program, you do not have to have extremely specific research questions. For a PhD program, you should be a little bit more specific, but the key thing to remember is that no one expects you to stick with that particular project. You could have the most detailed project description in the world in your statement of purpose, but people know that things change. You're going to be taking courses and you're going to be exposed to different people, and you might end up doing something completely different. But you should your research ideas in the statement of purpose should indicate that you are a good fit for the faculty members who are in that department, and that you have some idea of what research looks like in that discipline. Our next question, is it expected or necessary to visit every school I apply to? If so, how do I do so affordably, considering my choices are spread throughout the country? This is a really good question. So I would say that for graduate programs, it's much less common to visit before you have gotten into the program. So unlike with undergrad, where we recommend that high school students visit all the campuses before they apply, for graduate school, this is probably not feasible or affordable. A lot of programs will fly you out to visit after they have accepted you. And I know of some programs that will actually have specific programs for students of color because they really want to increase diversity. So they'll have like a whole diversity weekend kind of fly out program. If they don't offer you funding to go visit, it doesn't hurt to ask, because they understand that this is a big life decision. You're going to be spending anywhere from 1 to 10 years on that campus, so you want to be happy and they want you to be happy. So just ask. If they still can't help you out there, you could see if any graduate students are willing to host you, so you can at least save on housing expenses, which can be really expensive. Okay, our next question. In the personal statement, should you add information about yourself as a person in addition to as a scholar? Okay, so this works differently depending on whether or not the application gives you separate prompts for that. So in some applications, you'll get one big prompt that says, tell me what your research interests are and tell me who you are as a person. In that case, you would incorporate both. But a lot of schools will separate those two prompts. So first, it's tell me about your research and what you're interested in, what your career goals are. And then they have the diversity essay in which you would talk about who you are as a person. So it really depends on what the prompt is. If there's no indication that they're looking for more personal information, but you feel that it is important to state it, for example, if it informs your research, or if you think that they might give you special consideration, or if you need to contextualize why you got certain grades or why you took certain paths in life, then I would say that you should include it, but err on the side of caution and don't put too much of that. Do we have some more questions? Okay, so I guess this is more or less the end of our webinar for today. But if you have any more questions, please feel free to contact me. That is my UCLA email address on the screen there. And I'm also available on Twitter if you prefer to contact me that way. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope this was helpful. Unfortunately, we could not cover everything, but maybe if you ask the MMUF PN people nicely, they will have more webinars for you in the future that will cover the topics that you're most interested in.